Okay, welcome. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Public Safety Committee for Tuesday, October 28th, 2025. We have 3 members here. We're waiting for 2 more, but I'd like us to get started. And first item, are there any changes to the agenda? And there is one, actually. We had put the discussion of the Center for Governmental Research report as item 11. And I would like to move that up to the beginning of the meeting because our guest is here and there's 2 more people online. So I think we'll get into that discussion earlier. Other than that, I believe our agenda is in order. Anybody have any changes? Okay. Public comment. I have one blue sheet, and this is Amanda Kirchkastner. Welcome. Okay.
Hi there. Good afternoon. I'm sad I can't stick around for the CGR study. James Smith has been coming to multiple public meetings talking about how we need to do something. I wish more of an effort was made to include this man because he seems to care a lot and he's been working around it doggedly for a couple of years now. The main reason I came today is to discuss Code Blue, which is fast approaching. I want to strongly encourage the people in this room to have law enforcement's back to help monitor their interactions with unhoused people this season. I saw so many engagements with law enforcement at hotels that the taxpayers are funding for unhoused folks. I had experiences with elected people failing to connect me adequately with diversionary services. And because we only have 1 shelter, and it looks like there's going to be a lot of engagement with law enforcement, and county jail then becomes the backup plan. And because of bail reform, unfortunately, we can't detain people who have become a harm to themselves and others. I participated in the Office of Mental Health conversations they were having at the library there a couple weeks ago. And what was really interesting in coming up was how people who didn't need to be held at the hospital on psychiatric holds were being held for weeks at a time, when individuals who I saw going there on a daily basis, 941'd, which means the police were taking them up there, they would get released day in, day out. So I don't know if that's because of the Medicaid funding that the hospital gets and just the constant catch and release tactics. But for some reason, the people who need the stabilization aren't getting in at the hospital. And then they've learned that they have to escalate to greater harm to others and themselves in order to get a more attentive care response. When I was diverted to Reach couldn't even tell me how to help a person. They didn't even get back to me. Person committed 8 offenses. 4 of them were violent. 1 of them was against a hospital employee. 1 of them was against security there. That's not cool. Then they wind up in the court system, all because our forward-facing approach isn't forward enough at helping to divert people into the care that they actually need. So it's going to be coming up. I'm sad to not see it on your agenda. Warehousing multiple unhoused people with mental health and drug dependency issues in 1 location is a really, really bad idea, and it's going to cause a lot of problems for Ithaca and the greater community. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And I have Judy Epstein. And then I think I have 1 person online, but go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
It's not the right height for me.
And you can pull the microphone down. There you go.
Hi, I'm Judy Epstein. I don't have a prepared statement, but next time I think I will. I got an email from a woman named Beth who said that there was an emergency medical service meeting today, which I think I've been waiting for, on August 4th. I live on German Cross Road, which is a little sliver of the town of Dryden. And on August 4th, I had a heart attack late on a Sunday night. And I live alone. Took me about an hour to figure out that maybe I needed an ambulance. I thought maybe I could sleep it off, but I called 911 eventually, And they sent an ambulance, and I waited for a long time. The 911 guy stayed on the line with me, which is very nice. And at some point I was like, where's the ambulance? And he said, well, they're coming from Dryden. And if you know that area at all, you know that I am 24 minutes from Dryden, about maybe 10 minutes for Bangs to get there. But I said, why isn't Bangs coming? And he said, not their jurisdiction. So I was very, very lucky. Obviously, I'm here before you. I seem relatively healthy. I am. I had a major heart attack. I was airlifted to Rochester. I think time was really important, and I think I'm here because I'm lucky. I believe it might have been better if an ambulance had gotten there faster. And so one of the things I've done for the past few months is to show up at the airport. There was a fly-in breakfast, and all the emergency people were there. That's how I found out about this committee. I think these people are from the commission that did the survey. Someone said, well, there's a survey, and it'll be reported, and there'll be a meeting. The meeting will be September 30th, but that got postponed. And so this lovely woman, Beth, texted me yesterday and said, there's a meeting tomorrow at 1. So I decided to show up to try to keep an open mind and listen and see why it took 24 minutes for an ambulance to get to me. But it's an issue of some concern to me now. So thanks for having a public meeting where I can see what the deal is. Thanks.
Thank you. And we typically don't comment on public comment, but thanks for coming in and sharing with us. We will be having a presentation today on emergency medical services. That should be coming up in a few minutes. Let's see, we have somebody online?
Yes, you do. John, how are you today?
Good, Zach. Welcome, and go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. It's my understanding that the Department of Emergency Response has begun reprogramming all of the county first responder radios to be encrypted. And from my communication with the sheriff, that's supposed to happen this month. We're just a few days out from the end of October. And I'm curious what the pace of that switchover is. And if somebody from DOR could possibly discuss the rationale behind that switch. Also, you know, I believe it has something to do with some of the online communities that have sprung up around listening to the radio and kind of doing play-by-play, and I understand how they could be problematic. But they are kind of a valued source of information, and I'm curious that, assuming that this change is going to take place, if an additional conduit of information could be provided to the public. The Cornell Police Department has a police blotter they keep updated with basically every call they respond to. And I don't believe anything like that exists either in the city of Ithaca. There used to be that, but it was removed. And now for the county, I don't think there is a similar public disclosure of the emergency calls. And I think it would be kind of a beneficial kind of a supplement to you know, press releases, which only typically come out for major incidents and are sort of few and far between. There's a lot of stuff that's happening continuously, and people, you know, are understandably curious and kind of have a right to know what's going on in their community. So as this flow of information is about to be choked off, I think there should be something offered to kind of maybe not replace it, but to augment whatever information is publicly disclosed. So if you could get an answer on that from DOR to just sort of understand the timetable and the rationale, I'd really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the committee? All right. Seeing none. Next item of business is we have minutes from September 30th, 2025. Could I get them on the floor? Veronica moves, Mike seconds. Any questions or comments on our minutes? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? All those in favor? That is unanimous. All right. We'll proceed to Chair's report. And the first item is just rescheduling of the December Public Safety Committee meeting. And that's moving it from the fourth Tuesday to the second Tuesday. And the reason we're doing that is that if there was any action taken at that meeting, we need to have it covered by a legislature meeting to pass the resolutions before the end of the year. So the scheduling didn't work otherwise. And is there any objection from committee members to December 9th? Okay, well, we'll see if Lee or Shauna have any issues, but that's, I think, what we're going to end up doing.
3 p.m.?
At 3?
1 p.m.
1 p.m. 1 p.m., so same time. Although you have to account for daylight savings.
On Sunday, but that's, yeah. All right.
That's right. All right. Well, our guests are here and ready to go, but I would like to have our other committee members here. Do we have any sense, is Lee coming or?
He is not full time today.
Okay, and we don't know when Sean is going to arrive. Why don't we proceed with the CGR report, and I guess they can watch the video. And so I'll start out by saying welcome to Paul Bishop.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down from Rochester. And I understand you have some colleagues on screen. Is that Wiley Little and?
Wiley Little and Jim Cass, who were instrumental in pulling together the report with me as we were doing this.
Okay. And Paul, you and I spoke earlier today, and one thing I had inquired about, looking at the screen, there's several individuals from various towns that are quite interested in this subject. And I thought it might make sense if we could also have a discussion at a TCOG meeting if they were interested in doing that. And you had indicated you might be able to participate.
Yes.
Okay. So I see, let's see, I'm reminded of the magic mirror on Romper Room. I'm looking through it and I'm seeing Mark Whitmer and Rorden Hart and Dan Lamb. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes, we would welcome a joint meeting or your presence at TCOG.
Okay. I don't know when the TCOG meetings are, but if you could share the dates, we could try to do that before year end, I think would be best.
Yeah.
I don't know when you're
We have one in early December, and I'll get in touch with you about that.
All right. Is there one in November or just December?
December.
Okay. Yeah, if you can let me know the date. Let's see if we can schedule that. Okay.
Sounds great.
I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to start sharing the presentation. Hope this technology runs smoothly.
And just before you get too far into it, as you talk, make sure you're talking into the mic about 4 to 6 inches away. Even if we can hear you in chambers with a loud voice, the online folks won't be able to.
Like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Again, thank you for having us down here this afternoon and for your consideration and rescheduling after last month. So I had a medical issue I had to take care of at the end of September. So what we have today is a PowerPoint presentation that will run about, I think it's 25 slides. You have a copy of that in the agenda. We'll go into detail on several of the slides. And if there are questions from the committee as I'm going through, I'm happy to answer them. There will be, with a presentation, we don't go into all the detail that we have. And we'll talk about areas that you'll see more greater detail as we get into the report that will give some of our explanation. So again, what we'll do, we'll start giving a brief background about the project, then we're going to jump into what we refer to as our key findings. Those were our observations in these 4 areas. And then we will jump into the suggested action items, which are, again, we have categorized as supportive actions that the county and other governments could take immediately. Some actions related to the county RMR EMS program, and then talking about funding, how that can be done, and then really how to identify a path forward. Because we've gotten to this EMS system over a number of years, and any changes will take some time. Our engagement began in July of 2025. The focus was not necessarily on the whole EMS system, which can involve taking a look at dispatch and first response and your hospital, your EMS education system, but rather we were focused on the transporting agencies and the RMR program. We took time and we spoke with a lot of people. We have the list, I think it was over about 40 individuals. And then we also had the meeting with a number of the fire chiefs on top of that. So we tried to get a really broad basic perspective about how things are operating today in Tompkins County and what could be done going forward. We collected and analyzed the call data, and analyzed appears here in the past tense, and it really should be present tense because we're still working our way through. That's one of the reasons why we don't have a report to put in front of you, is as we were pulling it together and getting all the data tables, we found some errors in our methodology because as we were cleaning the data when it came from your dispatch system, we had to make some assumptions, and some of the assumptions mathematically weren't ringing quite true. So we have to go back and double check that to make sure that they were accurate. We're in the ballpark with the numbers I'm going to share today, but they may not be precise. We'll talk about that as one of the recommendations about how to better measure how your system is performing. And we conducted a provider survey. We realized that we weren't going to be able to sit down with all of the EMS providers, which are really your key component of making sure the ambulance calls get answered every day. We wanted to get their sense of how things are going. So this Rorschach blotch that you're seeing on the screen today is the call volume in Tompkins County. And that dark red spot in the middle, and I think we're probably sitting just about in the center of that, is the call volume, the densest part of calls that you see in Tompkins County. And then you have the other areas where there are a lot of calls. So you see up in Groton and Dryden, Lansing, you get that area, and then Trumansburg, and then you're wondering why in the world do we have it up in Seneca County in Interlochen? And that's because Trumansburg is the primary responder there. So we included their calls to Seneca County as part of our analysis. So this shows where you need to get your resources. Now, if we were to use the same map and say, where are your resources today? You would have an ambulance in Trumansburg. You would have an ambulance on duty in Groton. You would have an ambulance in Dryden. And then you would have a handful of ambulances operated by Bangs sitting in the center of Ithaca. And then you would have your RMR program that would be located one site north of the city and one site south of the city. So that's where your EMS resources sit today as we're talking. And the RMR program is on duty only during the day, during the week. The other units are 24/7. How we analyze the data, we initially wanted to look at several years, but with complications related to cleaning the data coming out of your CAD system, we settled on being able to do one consecutive year. So we started with August 1st, 2024 and ran through to July 31st, 2025. So we had that 12-month cycle, and we wanted to look at how many calls per day how many incidents for EMS were there every day. You see that variation from 52 was your peak in September of 24 down to 44 was your valley in November. But really you're averaging about 48 calls per day for an ambulance, or 2 per hour, but it doesn't come out per hour or per day evenly. When we look at how things break out by the week, this surprised me that Thursday was your busiest day. This is actually, we do a lot of these studies, and We usually do end up with a weekday as being the busiest, so Thursday is yours. But then Friday and Saturday were substantially slower, and Sunday was pretty busy for you. So I don't know what you're all doing in Tompkins County where Sunday jumps up to be a busier day than many of your weekdays. That's an anomaly when we're dealing with a residential community. Maybe it's all the tourists trip on the way out of town.
Yeah, it might have something to do with being a Buffalo Bills fan. It seems like Sundays are fraught.
That could also explain November. Well, November was a drop, so I don't know. September
Well, I was going to ask Joe or Mike, do you have any thoughts on why Thursday and why the monthly fluctuation?
I actually don't. I'm actually surprised by that number, having served in EMS for a couple decades. Generally, I find that Mondays tend to be the busiest day. I don't know if your data shows that for most places, so Thursday's actually kind of a surprise for me as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that variation between the weekdays is not that much. It's a couple hundred. So, and again, this is an average across the year. And then looking at hour of the day, and so we break the day into 6 blocks of time, roughly 4 hours each. So midnight to 4 to 8 a.m. are your slowest times of the day, and then things begin to peak up during the morning and the afternoon, and then drop back off into the evening, and then come midnight, it slows back down. So this is, again, a pretty common shaped curve for how the EMS volume goes. Because remember, we're responding to human activity. So when people are up and around, that's when they hurt themselves, that's when they realize that they're not feeling well, so that the call volume is always pretty low in the middle of the night. We asked agencies a lot of questions, and this was a complaint that the questionnaire was too long, and that's okay. I'm happy to have that complaint because you were interested. And so we go into detail with all the responses in the report, but this is our summary. So we took a look again at the 4 transporting agencies in RMR. We wanted to look at how big they were, how many employees they had, how many volunteers they had. And not surprisingly, Bangs was your largest employer, and the of both EMTs and paramedics. They have, I was a little surprised by their mix. They have a lot of part-time EMTs and a lot of part-time paramedics that they use to fill their schedules. And then when you look at Dryden, they're very heavy on their full-time their full-time paramedics. And a little bit, again, they use a lot of part-timers to fill in, or they may have 2 paramedics on duty. So those are your 2 largest agencies. And we have a little bit of a data issue there with Trumansburg as I'm looking at this, because they don't have 0 paramedics. So I got to fix this chart. I'm not sure where the gap appeared on as we were pulling this chart together. But they have really about as many paramedics as they do EMTs. So they do have paramedics. And then what was interesting with RMR is you are an EMT level program. However, most of your employees are paramedics, both full and part-time. So they have skills that they are not allowed to use because of how they're licensed. And taking a look at the call volume, annual calls for service, Bangs is at 1,200. Or 12,000, excuse me, and then Dryden at 2,500, Groton at 700, and then RMR was about 1,400 over the course of that year. Now, for every RMR call, they are not alone. They are responding with a transporting ambulance. Sometimes they cancel that transporting ambulance, but they're always responding with a transporting ambulance. So there's a duplicate in these the responses compared to the incidents. We asked, where are you taking people? This is kind of an important thing to consider as you're looking at a system. When you're able to transport someone from here to Cayuga Medical Center, you get back in service very quickly if you're Bangs Ambulance. You can turn around a call in under an hour. But if you're asked to go to Robert Packer Hospital, that turns into a 3-hour-long call. And if you're going up to Syracuse, that again is a 3-hour-long call. So, when you have transports out of the area, it turns from an hour-long call to 3 hours long. And if you have two of those going on at the same time, it really begins to drain your resources. You notice most of the other ambulances are transporting really inside Tompkins County. Although if you were to look at that other line, that includes going to trauma centers, such as going up to Strong or going outside the area, going down to Binghamton. And then that non-transport rate, this is a pretty common percentage where when you are dispatched to a call, an ambulance call, only about 2/3 of them are you transported to the hospital. So the ambulance crew gets there, assesses the patient, and the person decides not to go to the hospital about 1/3 of the time. And this becomes an issue when you are reliant on revenue from transport to make your operation work. So if 1/3 of the time you're being sent to a call and you don't get paid for it, it begins to hit that bottom line. But they also can't force a person to go to the hospital. And people call 911 for a lot of reasons that don't need to go to the hospital. And we'll get into that when we talk about recommendations in a minute. Any questions from the committee so far? Yeah.
If someone's airlifted somewhere, is that included in that table at all, or is that just a?
Yeah, we did not capture that as part of our analysis. We actually probably do have, no, actually we didn't. We filtered out. We filtered down, so we were grabbing just the information on the transporting ambulances and the RMR units. So in your dispatch records, for example, you might, if it's a serious event, you might have 15 units assigned to that event. We only pulled the information for the units that were either RMR or an ambulance transport.
So you might have that event might be like one or perhaps multiple of the data points that were a non-transport event here, but actually some other service flew them somewhere. And I don't know if that's a significant percentage of the responses. It might not be. Yeah,
I know, as an example, one of the events that we had was an accident that occurred in Groton. That was a motorcycle accident that involved both of their ambulances, an ambulance from Dryden and an air medical unit, as well as a number of fire resources. And we saw that on our initial data pull, and we said, you know what, we're focusing only on the transport ambulances and the RMR unit, which wasn't involved in that call at all. So the 911 center does know about those air medical resources that are sent to a scene, but we did not analyze it.
Paul, just a point of clarification. Back at the beginning, when you were introducing where our units were all stationed, we have 3 RMR vehicles, not 2. There's one north of the city in the town of Lansing, and then 2 both south of the city.
Okay, thank you.
So it's on record.
Yep. So about the fire rescue departments, volunteer fire departments vary significantly in the response to EMS calls based on nature and time of day. And this came up in the interviews, both with the 911 center, with your EMS your EMS and fire coordinators, and at the fire advisory board. Really, every fire chief decides what it is that they're going to respond to. And the scripts are close to each other. Sometimes they don't go at all during the day. Sometimes they go on every call, but it's written down for the 911 dispatcher to say, okay, this type of event came in. This is who I am going to send to go help. And often, it may involve the volunteer fire department. It may not. And you really have to look at each individual community, each individual fire response district to know how that works. As an example, because we spent some time talking with them, they're not volunteer, is the Ithaca Fire Department. But they have taken a look at their response protocols, and they have chosen to focus only on the life-threatening issues. So they respond to the calls that are identified as being life threats. through the 911 process, the emergency medical dispatching process, where when you call 911, they ask you a series of scripted questions, and based on the answers and years of experience, the system is able to identify how serious the condition is likely. And Ithaca Fire Department has decided that they are only going to respond to the ones that they believe, based on that, are life-threatening. And that is still close to half of their calls. In a year, they're responding to about 5,600 calls overall, and about half of those, so about 2,800, are going to be EMS in nature. And this is consistent for them over a period of years. And if you're looking at, individual volunteer fire departments, they will have a similar decision and similar decision matrix. What has happened is a lot of the volunteer fire departments have identified that they struggle to get a volunteer EMS response during the day, and that was the genesis of your RMR program a few years ago. Is there was a gap in people responding to calls during the day, so there was, we need to fill that gap, and that was what started the RMR program. EMS education is foundational. You don't have EMTs if you don't find them in your community and teach them. You need to identify the person who is interested and provide them the education. Right now, I'm going to suggest that your region doesn't have sufficient EMS education, either for EMT or paramedic. It is getting better at the EMT level. There's a new arrangement with SUNY Upstate and TC3. And you're offering one EMT original class per semester in the area. But it was pointed out to us that there's some competition for seats in that class between people who may only be in the community for 4 years or 5 years while they're getting their college degree, and they think becoming an EMT is going to help them with their professional career, and people who may be in your community for the long term, who are looking for a long-term career providing care as an EMT for one of your employers or as a volunteer EMT. So they're having only, each EMT class can handle maybe 30 students. So having competition for those seats isn't great. And another challenge that is relatively new is that you have to pay upfront to get into the class. And $1,800 can be a big ask, particularly if you're somebody who is young and you don't have a lot of resources. This isn't something you're necessarily going to get student aid, financial aid for, and we're asking you to get into this career, maybe to volunteer, and pay close to $2,000 for it. If you pass, you might get reimbursed, but probably not for the whole thing.
Was there a different structure in the past?
As recently as 5 years ago, students could sign up for the class and not pay in advance. And it would be paid for by New York State.
So that's
if they were affiliated with a qualifying agency.
And that's who's doing the reimbursement now?
Yes.
Or partial reimbursement?
Partial reimbursement now. They haven't changed that reimbursement rate. Actually, they just recently changed it, but it's still remarkably close to the level that it was set at historically, and it does not cover the cost of for TC3 or another organization to teach the class. And that becomes the challenge, right? It's expensive. The $1,800 cost is probably the true cost for TC3 to teach an EMT student, but New York State is not reimbursing anywhere near that.
That is part of the original reason why TC3 stopped teaching. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons why they let go of their teaching certification for EMS classes.
Okay.
And there is no paramedic program in the county. So anyone who wants to become a paramedic has to travel outside of the county. And becoming a paramedic is a 1.5 to 2 year commitment, often a couple nights a week, and sometimes also weekends, and they have to do clinical rotation as well. And that costs even more. Those costs will be approaching $8,000 to become a paramedic. And then, when we did our survey, which I'll get into in another slide, when we asked the respondents, where would you like your course sponsor, your EMT classes to be taught, they really The top answer was in or near Ithaca, and then the second was at rotating locations on a rotating basis, were their top two choices. But speaking of the provider survey, we distributed it. It was open for a couple of weeks. We had 141 responses. So when we think that there's about 200 EMS providers in the county, 141 responses is a great response rate. But not everyone completed every question. So you'll notice as we go through, you say, oh wow, we had 60 volunteers answer, but we only have their age for about 30 of them. Some key takeaways here. Of your paid workforce today, 3/4 of them were EMTs who were volunteers before they got hired. So if you're losing your volunteer pool, you're also facing a challenge for your next generation of paid employees, your paid providers. You need to begin to think, where are we going to get our paid providers in 5 or 10 years if we don't have volunteers today? But people were happy with their volunteer experience. 7 in 10 said they would recommend joining a Tompkins County agency as a volunteer. So if they had experience as a volunteer, they said it's a good thing to do. We'd like to encourage other people to do it. We asked people, and this was all comers, not just volunteers, so every respondent was asked, what do you see as your big weaknesses in your agencies in the county? And going away, the answer was administrative leadership. So this is the higher level leadership for their agency was the biggest weakness that they saw. There was also concerns about the high call volume, the quality of the stations that they operate at, and then the operational leadership. So that's your day-to-day manager or supervisor, and then the ability to get training. Now, we are making a decision that we're not going to break this down by agency because we don't want to call out an agency. But we will differentiate between the volunteer and the paid staff in the report. And then when asked about the top issues with training in the county, the time required, this is a regular, consistent concern. Although the EMT class has been this length for close to 20 years, people still say it's too long. It was better when it was shorter, but we're not going to lose those hours because we're expecting more things. There was also concern about the frequency in which it was offered, whether they had a chance to, was offered frequently enough. So they'd like to be able to have more and then travel to get to it. This, not going to dwell on it a lot, but this is we asked the ages, and just want to point out that we have more younger volunteers. So out of the top left is the percentage of respondents who are volunteers, and by age group, we have the under 20s and the 20 to 29 group are well represented. But when we look at the career staff, they're not as well represented. So we're not getting those 20-year-olds. That's a whole decade of employees we're not converting for one reason or another. Although some of them are both volunteer and career, as you see in that bottom slice. So that's just an interesting, are we missing an opportunity to get volunteers into a paid position if they're available? And we're not seeing paid folks into their 60s and 70s, and that's okay. Everyone gets a chance to retire. It's surprising, though, 1/4 of your volunteers, people who are only volunteers, are in that 60 to 69 age group, and 10% are over 70. So those are folks who will not be volunteering in the next decade, would be my guess. So here are our key observations. Took all of that data, all those interviews, and this is what our takeaways are. EMS in Tompkins County is not a cohesive system of care. There are several distinct service models that exist, dictated by political boundaries and generations of choices by political and agency leaders. I could probably sub out Tompkins for about 40 other counties in New York State. This is not unique to Tompkins that this has happened, but this is what you're dealing with. You have different levels of care depending on where you live, and that is driven by a lot of reasons. The decline of volunteerism has forced changes from the historical model. If you still had the number of volunteers that you had in the year 2000 or 1990, you had a different system back then because you had a lot of people who were willing to give of their time, and the system was different. You didn't have as many transports out of the area. Calls were shorter. There are a lot of reasons for that. All of your ambulance transports are completed by an ambulance service that bills. If you call for an ambulance, you're going to get billed. And that's okay. That's how it's done, in almost every county in New York State. The town and village of Dryden, primarily the town, and the village of Trumansburg, and the areas that Trumansburg serves, have made substantial financial investments of tax dollars to support their ambulances. Groton also funds EMS, although at a smaller share, and it's through their fire department, so it's not as easy to kind of pull out those numbers. But those three communities are all putting money out because they want a better service, and their political leaders have made those choices. The city and town of Ithaca, on the other hand, they are the largest concentration of calls. Well over half the calls in the county are in the town and the city, and they have no financial support for an ambulance transport service. Now, they do fund their fire department, which is expensive, that provides basic life support first response, but they are not a transporting agency. Bangs has a long track record for providing reliable service to Ithaca and several of the neighboring towns. So we don't want to forget that they've been doing this for 80 years. They've been responding to these calls and handling it well, but it's a financial pressure that we'll get into in a couple bits. So the county's RMR program is filling an important gap with first response in rural areas and providing a cushion for high volume times. There are almost no volunteers that respond to ambulance calls in the county. If you say, well, wait a second, Paul, on that slide for Dryden and for Groton and Trumansburg, you indicated they all have volunteers, and they do. But when we take a look and we ask them how often are the volunteers involved in doing transports, well, maybe a shift or two a week, whereas the majority of the calls in each of those communities is answered by somebody who is paid, and then every call in the city and town is answered by someone who is paid. All agencies report difficulty hiring and retaining. Bangs appears to be having the hardest time. They acknowledged that in our interview with them, and the anecdotes that were shared with us during our other interviews and responses on the survey indicate that they're having a hard time filling their shifts, and there's can be different reasons for that. The interfacilities out of CMC account for about 3 calls per day, handled primarily by Bangs. However, out-of-county resources are regularly used to transport patients that Bangs cannot. So if CMC calls up Bangs or calls 911 or Bangs, says, hey, we need to get somebody out, and they don't have a person available, they don't have a crew available, then CMC has to look elsewhere for that resource. And sometimes that resource is coming from an hour away to pick up that patient to then transport them an hour.
Paul?
Yeah.
Those types of transports, are those cash positive? Do ambulances generally make a profit on those out-of-county transports?
Generally speaking, interfacility transports are a good thing for the bottom line of an organization.
Okay.
For one, you're going to get paid for it because they've checked the insurance is there or the agency's going to be there. 2, they do with the Medicare or the private insurer reimbursement, they tend to pay a little bit better than your on the scene ones. So.
But then you have the problem of that ambulance is out of service for whatever time.
Yes, and CMC will tell you sometimes they're sending people a long way away to find a receiving bed, and we're talking several hours worth of transport.
Okay.
So that can tie up a crew for an 8-hour shift. And the information about mutual aid exchange is not easily researched using the current data. And this was a challenge for us. And one of one of the things that has slowed us down chewing through the data is how calls are recorded in the CAD and then how we're able to research it. And we would be here till 5 o'clock if I went through all of that. So just, we're working on trying to get a better answer than where we are. But you know, the anecdotes and the concerns are that Bangs is calling on a regular basis for their neighbors to come in. And then each of the other agencies, when they've had problems with staffing, and you know, in some cases, if you only have 4 full-time employees and one hurts their back, you lost a quarter of your workforce for a period of time, and you may not be able to get a fully staffed ambulance, or you're relying on your neighbors to respond in. So here's the action. All right, we break it down into these 6 categories, and each one of them is going to have at least a slide. And you know, some of these are, I think, are pretty low-hanging fruit for you to consider getting into easily, and others are going to take some time and some real debate before you move there. So education and recruitment. EMT education should be consistent, centrally located, and at minimal cost. You need to be able to recruit residents from Ithaca. This is a barrier. They can't access the New York State reimbursement because they don't have an agency to affiliate with to get that New York State reimbursement. Typically, it's going to be a volunteer fire department or one of the other ambulances, but neither Ithaca Fire nor Bangs, although their employees are eligible for this funding, they don't make it open to volunteers. Look at how to get a BOCES or a high school experience to career pipeline. You need to capture the interest, the excitement of somebody when they're 17 or 18, and that's how you can begin to turn them into that lifelong employee or that career-long employee. And you really need to consider and work with a core sponsor who has hybrid education. There is not a reason that you need to sit in the classroom for the whole EMT class to pick up your lessons. It is the state of the art and accepted by New York State that a good portion of the didactic material can be delivered remotely, and that helps cut down on your transportation. Consider a distance learning option for paramedic education. This is something that, again, New York State is acknowledging works, and they do have some bars that you have to jump over to get there, but they're not insurmountable, and that really can cut down on your people who want to become a paramedic from having to drive hours and hours if you're able to work with them, a distance learning program. Allegheny County and Essex County are 2 that I can name off the top of my head that we've worked with that have distance learning paramedic programs, that they're sending their students to some other county's paramedic program. And let's look at AEMT. This is a new thing in New York State, although someone just told me that critical care techs aren't going away, but that's another long discussion, which is an intermediate level in New York State. Not everyone needs a paramedic, but they need something more than an EMT. And the AEMT level might be able to fill that gap. They have some additional skills, some additional tools to provide, particularly in an area that's going to have a little bit longer transport and might make the difference there. So the county can look at this. But what we want you to come away with is, if you look on paper, your number of EMTs is consistent over 5 years or longer, but providers are choosing not to work in the system, particularly in the high volume, lower compensation system. So you have probably the right number of EMTs and paramedics on the books who live in Tompkins County, but they're not all coming to work when you need them to come to work and where you need them to come to work. We got to figure out what's going on there. And part of it is the volume that when you go to work at a high volume agency, if you can go to work somewhere for 10 hours and do 4 calls or 7 calls, most of us are going to say, you know what, getting paid the same, I'm going to go where I have to do less work. Communications. This is a county issue. You are the county, you are the 911 center. you receive the calls, you assign the calls. And right now, there's a policy where a unit has to be assigned to a call within a relatively short period of time, 5 minutes, if I have my recollection correct. You don't need to have an ambulance assigned for someone who has low back pain that they've had for weeks, and now they want to go up to CMC. They can wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes for an ambulance to show up. And it is appropriate with the call triage system that you have to identify these low priority calls and say, you know what, we're going to hang on to that call until the home agency is available. So we don't have to have Dryden or Trumansburg respond into Ithaca at 2 o'clock in the morning when we know Bangs has got a unit that's at CMC that they're going to come back and service in a couple of minutes, and they can go to handle this call. And I mentioned Broome County because they have this policy in place. They've been using it, and it's been working for them. And they feel that they are able to do it successfully. Dispatchers need to know Bangs' status. They need to know how many ambulances are available for Bangs. I'm sorry.
In your report, will we have access to the Broome County policy?
As an appendix, we will give you the citation for the Broome County policy.
Thanks.
Or the whole policy. We have it. So, and we'll give them the phone number too, because they were very happy to talk about the methods that they went through, and it's part of it's a whole criteria that has to be in place first, where you identify that we're running low on resources. But we don't want to pull our last resource and have it respond to a back pain call when that next call might be a chest pain call that we do need to have the shorter response time to. So the dispatchers need to know Bangs' status. You have to know what your resources are available when you're assigning your resources. And right now it's a mother, please send me help. And you need to be able to know this is the help that you have available and are able to dispatch them. The other agencies already share. And the technology is there.
Is there a reason that they haven't done that or don't want to do it? Just haven't asked them?
No, it's been asked. And there's a feeling that it's proprietary and somewhat dynamic. And there is something to it being somewhat dynamic in how they do their staffing. So it can change from hour to hour what they have available. But the units that the 911 system is going to have available, they should share. They don't necessarily have to commit all their units to the 911 system. You know, they might say, we're only going to have these 4 units available for 911 today. We might give you others if there's demand for others, but here are these 4 units that you can assign. We have a couple of others that'll be doing interfacility, and we might be able to assign them to 911 if there's the demand for it. But your dispatchers should know what their resources are available to respond to calls, and they don't right now.
Thanks.
There should be an easier way to track the exchange of aid, dropped calls, and outlier response times. 24-minute response time for a chest pain call is not the standard of care. However, there can be an explanation for it. It sounds, like it's a rural area, and it might just be the sheer distance of getting there, or it could have been a snowy night, or any of these different reasons why you might have a slow response time. But you want to identify when we're having a slow response, why. And it's just, a simple thing where a dispatcher takes a look and says, okay, it took them longer to get there. This is why. And an indication. And then you're, as a system, be able to look at it and say, okay, and when you have somebody who's dropping a lot of calls, is there a pattern? Do they have lower staffing on the weekends? When you have an agency that had illnesses or an injury that took out part of their paid workforce, that's why there were a lot of dropped calls in that community for a period of time. Initiate nurse triage and alternate transport model for low priority patients. A nurse triage system, again, ties into the 911 system of call triage, and it's a service that is available by reputable providers. You don't have to do it yourself. and you're able to take that call after your dispatcher identifies that it's a very low priority call. They can assign it to the nurse triage system. That nurse triage system, after they learn your system, will be able to say, okay, this is a resource that I can get you to, so I don't even have to send an ambulance at all. This has been used in a number of counties, and again, in the report, we will give the references and then the people you can talk to about how to get that set up. It's not free, but it's less expensive than sending an ambulance. And right now, the majority of your ambulances respond with a paramedic or advanced life support every time, but it's reasonable to have basic life support units involved in the system, and you want to be able to differentiate between ALS and BLS on your call categories. Right now, the descriptor gives me an idea, but as strange as it sounds, you can have a low priority chest pain. So we want to be able to identify those, or a high priority backache. So oversight, and this is something that really is driven as county policy, all in concurrence with the Regional EMS Council, but or Regional EMS Medical Advisory Committee, or REMAC. But one suggestion here is for the county to actually begin to contract with the people who are answering its 911 calls. You are giving them the call to say, please go respond to it, and you need to have some standards established for them. This ties back into Bangs, that first bullet about sharing status information with all agencies. Right now, most of them do, one doesn't. Establish your response time targets for high priority calls. Now, response times are not the best measurement of performance of an EMS system, but they're an objective tool that we can use, and we can identify if we're not able to get to a high priority call in a timely manner, we need to do something to improve our system. And say this is what our target is. And your target is going to be different for an urban center like Ithaca or a more rural area like Danby. It takes longer to get places. Require reporting of information on a regular basis from your agencies. Establish and maintain a minimal scratch rate. And what I mean by that scratch rate are calls that you're asked to respond to that you're not able to. Right now, none of your agencies are struggling from being able to respond to a call. There are peaks, there are times where Dryden or Trumansburg wishes they didn't have to respond into Ithaca. There are times where Groton might be called to respond to Dryden and they wish they didn't have to. So these things happen. You want to know what your target is. Most communities that do this establish somewhere between either a 90 or a 95% home coverage rate, where you're covering either 9 out of 10 or 19 out of 20 calls of your own, and it's those exceptions that you have to rely on mutual aid for. So you're asking a lot of your agencies, what are they getting in return? Well, we'll talk about funding in a bit, but there is the potential where you say, okay, we're asking for all this information, you're giving it to us, and in return, we're going to pay you for responding to our calls. So you're paying a per 911 call fee if they are meeting those standards and sharing that data with you. Establishing a response time goal, saying at a county level, this is what we expect. This is what our community, this is what our residents should expect. And again, it's not a one size fits all. You're doing it based on the type of call that they are receiving. Look at the care bundle targets for cardiac, stroke, and trauma. These are high impact calls. Some of them are lower in frequency. And what we say by a care bundle is these are things that you should be doing on the scene or en route that are the minimum standard of care. So for example, for a chest pain patient, we should be getting a 12-lead EKG. We should be getting them aspirin. If it's cardiac in nature, we should be getting them nitroglycerin. If we're getting something that's identifying that it's an MI, we need to get them to a center that can handle that. All of these are care decisions that are made in the field, and this is our expectation. It's not good enough just to show up and pick them up and take them to the hospital. We need to do the right thing when we're with them. And also look at the certified first responder level. Now, that's the first time it appears in this presentation, that abbreviation, CFR. CFR is an entry-level EMS credential. It takes about 50 hours to learn, and it is designed for someone who is going to spend the first, is going to be alone with the patient for 5 or 10 minutes. How to do an initial assessment, provide immediate care to them, and then turn it over to an EMT or somebody else for transport. This is a good level of care for a first responding agency like a fire department to have. There are not enough of these, in my opinion, in New York State. It doesn't get taught often. We don't encourage people to do it often. This is really going to would be a cultural shift, but I think this community has a need for that type of care.
And does that naturally lead into the EMT training, or is it alternative to?
My thought is it's really an alternative. Yes, the curriculum overlaps heavily with the first third of an EMT program, but it's an alternative because it is taking people who have no other experience, and we want them just to be able to do something for 10 minutes with a patient until we can get there with an ambulance. And particularly in a rural area where there's a relatively low call volume, we're not getting really fancy in what we're teaching them. We're teaching them the basics of assessment, the basics of life-saving care, and it can be done quickly, which is the other component, right? People complain that EMT training takes too long, and losing 6 months, 2 nights a week is a long time. The CFR class can be taught a lot quicker than that. Looking at system support, things that you can do, the psychiatric emergencies, the care team, the IPD initiatives have the potential to decrease psychiatric transports. These are not a large percent of your transports, but they are there. And they can be time consuming, particularly if you're on a scene waiting for the patient for the scene to be made safe, the patient to be stable before you transport them. It can take 2 hours on a call that would otherwise be a pretty quick pickup and transport. And take a look at the role of RMR and lift assists. And this is something we were able to identify that 1 in 8 of your calls are for a fall in the county. It's one of your highest call categories is a simple fall. Many of these are lift assists, but not all. And they tie up the EMS resources on non-transports. In particular, Bangs spends a lot of time. I'm sure if we were to look at the third of their calls that are non-transports, a good percentage of them are going to be for simple falls. Is there a way that burden can be lifted for them? I know they've already had conversations with the city fire department, and the city fire department's not interested in getting involved in it because they're already marginally staffed. And this would be an additional burden. This would increase their call volume substantially. So they're trying to, what is another solution? And this is a conversation to have with Bangs, and is there a way that somehow the city, the town, and the county can come together to figure out a way to help lighten that burden without using the fire department. Okay. I'm going to take a breath because this is where the fun part starts. So what can the county do about expanding its EMS and RMR program? I was happy to see in the 2026 budget that you are continuing it. There's not a question that what's going on today needs to continue. The question is, do you need to expand it? So this first bullet is this suggestion that you obtain an ambulance operating certificate with a goal of an ALS first response on a regular basis and occasional ambulance service. This is not to supplant an existing service. We're not trying to take any territory or any calls, first calls away from anybody here. The goal is to fill gaps to prevent draining resources from outlying areas and to be a safety net provider when other resources are depleted. This is truly to be that safety net. The suggestion of, ALS first response, you already employ paramedics. They respond, they have the knowledge, which is the most important part of being a paramedic, but they don't have the tools to do that, and they don't have the legal license to use those tools and that knowledge. It's an expense to bring them up to be paramedics. You have to change that program. It's not something that you do overnight. You got to buy things, but it really improves that standard of care. And when they are the only person available to respond to a call anywhere in the county, they can bring the best level of care there. And if you're going to take the effort of getting a municipal operating certificate, the suggestion of going all the way to the ambulance level is intentional. It's work, it's effort, it's expense to get your operating certificate. If you get one at the ambulance level as a paramedic, you can choose to only run the ambulance every now and then, as long as you're providing that paramedic service regularly. If you do just the ALS first response, and then in a year, 6 months, you realize that there's really the need for the ambulance level, you have to go through the process all over again. So if you do it all the way to the ALS ambulance the first time, and then make arrangements for operating an ambulance periodically, you're answering 1 or 2 ambulance calls a month, that's enough to maintain that operating certificate at the paramedic ambulance level. Again, you're not stepping in front of anybody, but it's when there's that mutual aid need, and that will happen once or twice a month. You'll have your people available, and the call, the 911 center will identify, we need someone to cover this call for us. You step in at that point and do it. Establishing paramedic as a civil service title. Right now you have EMT, and you hire paramedics under that title. You should have the paramedic civil service title. There are examples of doing that. That county CON, should you choose to get it, can be used as a contracting vehicle for short-term staffing issues and system management. What we mean by that is if there is a high volume going on right now, or you have an event, say the Ithaca Marathon or half marathon, and you are need to pull resources in from outside of the city of Ithaca, you can't ask Trumansburg to send you an ambulance to park in the city without violating their operating certificate. But if they were working under the flag of Tompkins County, they could do that. Likewise, at the Grassroots Festival, you can't ask Dryden to go over and sit at the Grassroots Festival and be willing to transport without violating their operating certificate. But they could as part of a Tompkins County operating certificate. Again, this is something that we need to get into more detail, but this is kind of the high level overview. Numerous counties operate ALS and or ambulances, and I listed 4 and then said 3 that are nearby. Livingston, Wayne, Yates, Wyoming are all doing it as county ambulance services. Now the bottom bullet is not a throwaway. Expanding the county EMS workforce could further disrupt the current labor distribution. I indicated that Bangs has told us, and their employees have told us, that they have trouble recruiting and retaining staff. If you expand the RMR workforce, you're going to have 4 or 5 more employees that are getting paid at a civil service level and receiving civil service benefits, and that's hard for a commercial ambulance provider or even one of the smaller town ambulances to compete with. So it's going to disrupt the labor pool right now, if and when you do this. It still might be the right thing for the county to do, but you have to understand that happens. I have another slide to talk about this, and then I'll take questions. Yeah. So what's the cost? All right, the RMR budget in 2026 is, if I'm reading your documents right, $684,000, a little bit more than you're getting this year. So a bridging the gap ambulance service. So you go out, you get one paramedic ambulance that you operate periodically, but you keep that paramedic first response vehicle 24/7, BLS first response vehicle 12 hours a day or 7 days a week. That's $1.7 million for staffing. Excuse me, that paramedic ambulance is operating 24/7. So you're operating 2 units 24/7, one 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your cost is $1.7 million. So $1 million more than you're spending in the RMR program. The safety net ambulance service, that's a little bit more. That would really prevent anyone from having to do mutual aid, right? So Dryden and Trumansburg would never have to leave their towns, or at least not for elsewhere in Tompkins County, because remember, that's not the only place they mutual aid. But if you do that, that's $2.5 million in staffing. And again, we have more details in the written report, but just give you an idea of what the expense is related to that. Ambulances are not inexpensive. It's $250,000, and if you were to decide that you wanted to buy one today, it probably wouldn't show up until early 2027 if you bought it new. It's a long lead time to get an ambulance today. Questions about these last two slides before I move on?
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was wondering, for both of those numbers, are there any reimbursements that would be, that we would be eligible for?
And that brings us to the next slide.
Okay.
Actually, before you get there,
Yes, the short answer is yes, there is.
Okay.
those numbers, are they in addition to the 684,000
No.
or instead of?
Instead of.
Okay, so you're looking at a differential of 1
million and 1.8 million.
Okay. Mike?
Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, if you're saying that the safety net ambulance service would eliminate the need for mutual aid, don't some of and this might be a question for some of the towns that are on, don't they make some money off of that mutual aid call? I mean, wouldn't that undercut their service? But maybe they want that service undercut. I don't know.
Yeah. This is why it becomes a community policy discussion. You're right. It would cut their call volume. By our calculations, and we got a little margin of error, but that's about 80 times in a year that Dryden responds somewhere, or responded into Ithaca during our 1 year gap. So that 1 year study was 80 times for them. And Trumansburg, I think it was about 20.
So out of that 80 calls, do we know how many of those resulted in a transport? They could actually make money off of, I guess.
Probably about 50.
Okay,
so it's not nothing.
Right, so the question would be, could they absorb the loss of 50 less transports?
However, if you're to talk with them about how they're operating, they've added staff because of this demand.
Gotcha.
That they might not need to add.
Okay. Gotcha.
So ALS and some ALS first response you're able to bill for. So that is part of how you could generate revenue. Rich, you asked about interfacility transports. This is definitely one of the needs that the community has. If you were using the county RMR program as the second call after bangs to do interfacility transports, those are guaranteed revenue, and it's reasonable to step in and to do that. And that's a need in the community is answering those calls. How's it funded? You also, it becomes part of the general operating budget. We looked at other mechanisms that other counties are using to fund their EMS services. So Shenango County is the only one that I could find that does this. Is they have a fee on vehicles registered in their county of $5 to $10, depending on the weight of the vehicle. And they collected about $320,000 a year. And if you were to take their population is about half of yours. So if you're doubling the population, you're going to about double the number of motor vehicles. You could expect to double that revenue as a tax. Now they had to it was a home rule through New York State Legislature to do that, but they've had it on the books for a handful of years. 3 to. You could designate a portion of the sales or visitor tax revenue. They're doing something like that for your airport funding right now, where you're saying, again, if I'm reading your county budget proposal for 26 properly, it's a discussion piece that you have that you want to designate a part of that for supporting the airport. This is another thing that you could designate to support. And then, final comment is chargebacks to the municipalities that rely on the service. And you can either directly charge them back or withhold the sales tax that you share with them. That if they're using that service more than others, that is something, again, that is done for where a county is providing a service to one municipality and not another. And another bullet that's not here because it's not law yet, but this is a discussion point, and it has been with the New York State Association of the New York State Association of Counties, for a number of years, is trying to be allowed at the county level to create an ambulance or EMS service district where the county can establish we want to charge a fee to these properties because they're receiving this service different from the others. And when I talk about the number of counties that are providing EMS, it's a lot. And there are a lot of them that have different tiers of service because they may have a city or a town inside them that is providing an ambulance service that those taxpayers are paying for. And then the county is doing it in other areas. And they're not, right now, you're not allowed to create a county district. That would, to me, be a good solution to be able to fund it and only charge those who are receiving that higher level of service. Talking back to the chargebacks, this is something that Madison County does. How they do it actually is they charge everybody, and then municipalities that operate their own ambulance get money back out of that fund. So if you operate an ambulance, you get money from it, and the county then keeps the money that they need to operate their parts. And again, we'll have that legislation available as appendixes in the report. Other options, right? Enter into a contractual arrangement with all ambulance services to ensure that information sharing and provide some financial support. That's how Madison County does it. They actually have an agreement with every town, every ambulance. And there's certain standards they have to meet, but if you meet those standards, you're getting cash. So there's the stick and the carrot. Use an operating certificate to contract for services on an as-needed, on-call basis to fill gaps. And this is something that happens in Columbia County. They're more rural than you are. They only have a couple of services there. And when those services get depleted, they call on another service under the county operating certificate to relocate to a central location, something that New York State doesn't really want you to do under our current operating certificate rules. And then work with a healthcare system or other nonprofit to provide ambulance service under a county operating certificate. That was how Sigler County started their ambulance service. Now the hospital actually owns the operating certificate. The county is out of the business, but for the first couple of years, that's how they ran it, where it was with a county operating certificate and then contracting with the hospital system to do that. Wyoming did a similar thing for almost 20 years, where they had the operating certificate and then had a provider, a commercial provider providing the service. So what if? A single provider that was adequately staffed, well-led, and properly funded, covering the whole county, would lead to better patient outcomes for the residents and visitors to Tompkins County. There are enough ambulances and close to enough providers, if we could get them all to work when we wanted them to staff this system. However, this would be a dramatic paradigm shift. The transports would cover a significant portion of the operating expense, but there would still need to be the financial support from the county or other governments to fund it. The single provider could be either municipal or nonprofit, so county run or run by a nonprofit, a hospital system perhaps. But the population density does not favor a for-profit entity without a subsidy for the whole county. If all Bangs was responsible for was covering the city and town of Ithaca, they could probably do it financially. But we asked them to go, or they volunteered to go outside, and that really kind of pushes their resources. And then the long-distance transfers kind of push them a little bit further. Commercial ambulance providers really have been having a hard go, and I don't know that it's going to get any easier in the next 5 to 10 years. But if you were to do this, if you were to move there, right, Bangs would have a hard time operating just on interfacility work and what the single provider couldn't handle. Several ambulance services with long traditions, Trumansburg, Dryden, Groton, they would close if you went to a single service. However, this is probably where you're going to be in 2050. You're going to be at a single agency providing it for the whole county. The economies of scale are there. You're going to improve patient care. Question really becomes, how long will it take you to get there? So identifying that path forward. RMR program is filling an essential gap that was created as you've lost ambulance services and the decline in that volunteer first response. Mutual aid for Dryden and Trumansburg and the Bangs is identified as a concern. It's not well quantified. When we looked at it, our first cut of the numbers is that it's about 100 times in the year that we looked at it that one of their ambulances came into the city. It may be more than that because of how we did some of the analysis, or we're redoing it. But it is, it's a real thing, but Bangs is still covering well over 95% of the calls that they're asked to respond to. There is this inter-facility need from CMC that Bangs can't meet. And CMC has this information and is in conversation with Bangs about trying to improve it, but they're having to go to providers outside of the county on a regular basis to cover their calls. Forming an ambulance service at the county level could lead to disruption in the EMS market force and labor force, leading to problems with the distribution of labor, but would help relieve stress on the existing ambulance services. EMS is not a mandated service under law in New York State, but there is an increasing awareness that it is essential to a thriving community. And when we look at how best to operate a system, you need to have a decent sized geography and population. And in New York State, that really falls at the county levels. And the county is going to be looked to continue to expand its financial support for EMS to ensure that all the needs are met. That is my last slide.
Okay. Well, Paul, to you and your team, thank you for all the work you put in. This is really helpful to get it all in one place. And I'm sure there's going to be questions and comments, but I'd like to go to Mike and Joe first. Do you have any thoughts you want to share at this point?
Not really. I just want to extend my gratitude to Paul and his team for the study. We just got a copy of it last night, so I really wanted to hear what he had to say and not just read his slides. So we want to take an opportunity to look at it and digest it a little bit.
Yes, I imagine this will be a continuing conversation. Joe, did you have anything?
No, I'm in the same boat as Mike.
All right. Corsa, what do you think?
I would say the most important slide is slide number 25, the what if. And it is essential that all the partners read that, understand it, and think through the processes and identifying what we need to do to solve the problem everybody admit exists. So, yes, so thank you. I think it's really good work. Some of them are known, and also adding the emphasis to it helps to make decisions as we move forward.
Mike?
I was wondering, did Bangs weigh in on your 25-year projection?
No. Again, this is a public meeting. I honestly wouldn't have been surprised to have them here and asking me about it.
Right. I mean, well, this would also include Dryden and Trumansburg.
Yes.
Possibly folding, or likely folding,
Yep.
according to this. I mean, have they weighed in on that scenario? Do they agree with that assessment, I guess, would be the...
Well, so the primary premise is that the best way to serve this county for EMS, like it's the best way to serve the county for the 911 center, is to have a single provider that's handling the whole thing. And they can coordinate the resources the best. You're going to be able to give them the oversight they need. You'll be able to develop the leadership that you need. And when you have a larger employer, you're able to do a lot of different things. So yeah, small agencies don't necessarily like that answer. But when you look as to how to develop a high-performing EMS system, you need to be able to put good money at it. You need to be able to have good supervisors. You need to be able to develop your employees well. And it's hard to do that on smaller scales.
Right. I guess part of my concern is that a large part of our population is at Cornell, and I don't know what Cornell will say to this. I don't know if they will, hey, we're going to join that partnership. I don't know.
Lots of unanswered questions here.
Yeah. So interestingly, I'm not sure how big the ambulance call volume is at Cornell. All right, they have a young population. They have the access to health services.
Right.
If you're to look at the Ithaca Fire Department's EMS responses to the Cornell campus, they are much smaller than they are to the rest of the city of Ithaca.
Right.
Okay, Lee.
I'm sorry. Number of things.
Yes.
I spent the morning putting together the Groton Fire Department's budget presentation for their contract negotiations tonight with the town.
Okay.
So the numbers are fresh in my mind, and I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to talk with you before, because I could have filled in some of these gaps that are there.
We're happy to take that now and make sure it's a complete final report.
I'd be more than happy to give that to you.
Okay.
But would it be fair to say that the amount of money that could be generated through insurance reimbursements and private pay and what have you is a finite amount? And why I say that, there's only so many calls you're going to have that are going to generate so much money.
Yeah.
We've been in the billing for 2 years as of last month, and of course it's taken a good portion of that 2 years to bring Medicaid and Medicare on board, which are a majority of the reimbursements. And Medicaid is at $160, I think, is a basic amount before they start the add-ons for other parts of it. And that number has sat there for how many years? And the true cost of the calls is far greater than what you're getting out of maybe a third of your reimbursements. Where I'm going with this, we're looking, for example, at our service, strictly in one community, $200,000 annually net reimbursement on a roughly $600,000 a year budget. And that's heavily subsidized by the fire department and the village in providing facilities and volunteers to make that run. When we started on this study, Irene worked with me on that, and it was told a rule of thumb is take your total volume of calls and multiply it by about $300, and that's what your reimbursements are going to look like, overall calls. That's about where we've ended up.
Yeah.
So if the county, let's take this one step further, if the county had a county-wide service, you could expect that the cost of service would be reimbursed by non-tax revenues at probably a third of what your cost of service is. I'm guessing that. Maybe it's a little bit higher if you get into interfacility transports, get into mileage, get into some of the other add-ons. Bottom line is, what would it cost for a full-blown county ambulance service with 10 to 15 rigs round the clock, similar to where we are today? I don't know if we're there really. Dryden runs 2, Groton runs 1, Trumansburg runs 1, there's 4, and then Bangs may run from 4 to 6 on average. So if you start looking at that, you're looking probably at a county-wide budget of what, $10 to $15 million with a possibility of reimbursement of a third of that? But I'm just laying some numbers out there. But your impact on the taxpayers to run a county-wide service is far more than that $2.5 million number that's quoted here. So the other thing I want to mention is that
you're talking apples and oranges, right? That 2.5 million was for a small apple,
right?
And we're talking about a very large orange.
That's correct. Okay. So it's the number you're looking at for the county to provide the service would be significantly larger than the 2.5 because of just one piece included in that.
But there's also significantly more revenue, and you know, can we, as we're pulling together the final report, include those figures? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where, after the budget process we've been through, that's what the legislature would be looking at as a worst case scenario.
But yeah.
The other thing is that I would want to mention is by running a civil service system, what would your paramedic rate be? We've got the rapid response medical. When you got all rated and you hired, you're paying $25 to $30 for an EMT. In a
for our
paramedic
modeling, we used roughly $33 an hour.
Roughly 33.
Which was we used the same. We put them in the same title as one of your airport rescue firefighters.
And why I bring that up is that our paramedics are averaging about $27 a thousand, or $27,000, $27 an hour. So you're looking at a compression factor here because you're going to raise all those salaries up to a civil service level, plus provide the benefits package that goes with them. So the cost of service by running it at a county or a municipal level is significantly more than what those providers are doing today. Does it improve the level of service? Probably does. Maybe entices more to join into it.
And I also want to point out, I was careful in my wording. I didn't say a single county system. I said a single county provider.
Okay.
Or a single provider for the whole county, right? So if you were to create the Tompkins County Ambulance, Inc., that's a nonprofit that has governing from, pick a dozen different people, representatives, different organizations, different municipalities, but it's an independent nonprofit that receives money from the county, but it operates independently. Maybe it's associated with a health system, maybe it's associated with some other nonprofit organization that could serve as a backstop. And that organization is then able to leverage donations, contracts with the county, but also avoid some of the challenges of being a for-profit entity, right? They don't have to pay sales tax. They can, they don't have to hire by civil service and follow those rules, but maybe they're going to be paying more than they were before.
But that would be a lesser cost than a county department operating as an arm of county government.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
You've
got a whole spectrum there.
Yeah. And there's not a single size solution.
Right.
I highlight that a number of counties are choosing to make them their own employees, but that's not what's happening everywhere.
Right. And I appreciate a couple things that you've included in this. You've touched on, through the mental health and the falls, you've hit on two key areas. Is there a call reduction strategy that could be employed to lessen some of the burden that's on the system? The other thing that you alluded to are some changes in state laws that might also be able to facilitate this. And I've advocated, and there are others that are advocating strongly, that the counties do be allowed to form special districts where they're needed. One other question, just in general. Are you suggesting that, would you suggest, is it an option that some combination of people could perhaps contract with bangs, either at a county level or multiple municipalities, to entice them or incentivize them in some manner to improve on the resources they've got?
I think that would be another reasonable consideration. If there were, if I were talking to City Council or the Town Board of Ithaca, either one, I would say, yeah, you have this service who's been doing it for 80 years, but you don't get any information from them, right? You don't know how many calls they cover. You don't know any of their performance. And they also don't have, guarantees from you. So it is very common to have a contract between municipality and a commercial provider to provide a service.
I know, like the city of White Plains a few years ago had a contract for $300,000 that supplemented the commercial. And I know the city of Buffalo has a contract that supplements AMR. So it raises, it gives them an additional revenue in order to sustain it. And I don't know that we've ever had that discussion here locally.
Well, so I suggested it here at the county level, but it very well could be done it would have to be at both the town and the city level in Ithaca. You couldn't have one without the other, although the majority of the calls are in the city. But you need to get that. If you're going to give bangs something and they could use the additional stream of revenue, you need to get something, which is reliability and information. And that's at the county or any of the municipalities. And Lansing uses them a lot too.
Well, and one more point, and I'll let you go. Out of county stressors, Dryden contracts with the towns of Virgil and Hartford, and Trumansburg runs into Sigler and Seneca counties. So you've got a little broader area that these call volumes reflect. The other thing is we talk about where Bangs is receiving support from the internal agencies. And one other area that we might want to take a look at is neighboring counties and the stresses that they're having. And I've personally have seen a shift where a couple of us on the east side are spending a lot of time in Cortland County and to some extent into Cayuga County. And I know that Groton, again, I'll use that example. There was a time when we averaged 24 twice a month mutual aid calls to other entities. Last year it was over 10% of the volume, and a huge chunk of that was not within Tompkins County. It was going elsewhere. But part of the stress is every time they moved that rig to a neighboring county, you were pulling Dryden in order to backfill, and consequently sometimes Bangs coming back to backfill Dryden. So the system actually, just cautioning, goes well beyond the borders right now. the stronger Tompkins becomes from a pay scale and a staffing scale, you may still have that stress pulling you out because you're going to take away from those that are around us in that broader economic situation.
Yes.
That's all I got to say. But I appreciate the data here. I think you're right on with a lot of it.
Lee, I get the impression you think that a county ambulance might be expensive.
Yes.
Shauna?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the fact that for decades and decades and decades, we have relied on volunteers to volunteer their time, volunteer their livelihoods to serve our communities. And so, you know, whenever I hear presentations like this, you know, we've also relied very heavily on banks. And, you know, personally, I've been impressed with all of the agencies and organizations in our county. I've met with many of them, and their hearts are definitely in the work because it's stressful and emotional and all of that stuff. But, you know, the one thing that I keep thinking, there are a few points. One is the assumption that we're still going to have the same healthcare system in a year than we have right now. I definitely believe that we're going to have a higher level of people that are probably going to be uninsured through Medicaid as well as the Affordable Care Act. We know that people's premiums are going to sometimes more than, you know, 8 times what they're paying right now, and people aren't going to be able to afford it. And so the assumptions that their insurance are going to reimburse, you know, a certain portion of each ride, I think we're going to find that that's not going to be the case. And some of the municipalities that are providing services, while there's definitely a deficit of running these programs, you're going to see an even larger deficit. You know, I think as we look forward, we're not going to be able to figure this out with just the county at the table. We have to use the resources and the history from all of our volunteers, from all of the people that have been doing this for decades, and make sure that we're not recreating the wheel, and we're also not pissing people off in the process, because we're going to need their knowledge and we're going to need them at the table in order to figure out how to actually serve our community.
Okay. And I apologize. I've been looking up at the clock going, oh, we got plenty of time. It's only 12:20. But it obviously is not, and we've used up most of our time. I'd like to get a few more comments if we can, but what I would suggest then is instead of reports from each of the departments, you could just tell us if there's anything urgent that we need to know, and we'll finish up the meeting that way. And I apologize for going long on this one issue, but it's so important. Dan.
Thanks. You laid out one scenario where there's one county ambulance that is backfilling and maybe twice a month on it as an estimate. How would that work? I mean, that crew is just sitting there on call all this time, or are they in one of our other EMS programs?
So that crew would be primarily, you know, with the RMR program, and you would then have the ambulance potentially available, and if the need arose, or might be even pre-planned, and be able to be told, and maybe you identify that, you know, during the Bills game we have a hard time staffing, so we're gonna, you know, make sure the volunteers, you know, they don't want to answer the calls then, so we'll put on a paid crew then and be able to answer the call at that point.
Okay.
But what you do have to, if you have that operating certificate, you do have to use it periodically, or the state will say there's not a need and ask for it back.
Okay, thank you. Another question, you talked about a scenario where there could be chargebacks to the towns. I just want to make sure I understood that a little better. So that would be Danby doesn't have an ambulance service, and X number of people used ambulance service in 2025, therefore the county would bill the town for a certain amount?
I would suggest that it would probably be better off to be proactive, and that you say, okay, these are the towns that are providing their own ambulance service, and they won't be charged. And these are the communities that are not providing an ambulance service. So based on population, because that's really, I think, how EMS services are demanded, you would say, okay, based on this population, and you know that you're going to need our ambulance service because you don't have a reliable one of your own, this is what it's going to cost for us to be able to be your primary service. And the goal, the scenario in which we're talking about that is when you're the primary service, not as you're filling in as a backup.
And would something like that have to be done by contract, by permission of both parties? Is there the county can't just say, okay,
right,
Lansing, you owe us money.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the legislature would be involved in that. And I think I mentioned that Madison County does something along these lines, and I have copies of all their legislation that you can take a look at as to how they formulated it. And what was key there is they have a handful of providers in the county, I think 6. And between those 6 providers, they cover the majority of the county, but there's some towns that they don't cover. So there's a tax that's levied on the whole county, and the towns that have their own provider, those providers get money from the county, and the towns that don't have their own provider, the county keeps the money.
So that's actually
the service.
A good leading to my next question. When you say a tax, do you actually mean a tax, or do you mean a series of contracts with each town mutually agreed upon? Tax is not mutually agreed upon.
With representation, it is. So yeah, when I say a tax, it's a tax.
So that was actually my next. So the county has the ability to establish an ambulance tax?
No, it becomes part of your general fund, right? So you're deciding as you build your budget that, just like, today you decide that you are going to have, a sheriff's road patrol, which is not a mandated service. And that becomes part of your general budget, is that we're having the Sheriff's Road Patrol and everyone is going to pay for it.
So, thank you. So as far as you know, the county can't have a separate ambulance tax?
No, I think that would be a great idea if you could. And I would strongly encourage Tompkins County, and I can give you a list of other counties that I've had this conversation with, and you get together and you try and get the legislature to make that change. Because counties should be able to create districted taxes for service. Today, we're talking about ambulances. In a handful of years, you might be talking about fire departments.
Thank you.
Okay. Veronica, did you have something?
Yeah, first, thank you so much for this presentation. This might be my favorite presentation I've ever heard in all my time here so far. The step back and systemic view and bringing in of examples of what other counties doing, I feel like I have a much better picture now. I really, really appreciate you laying out a long-term view, which people can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds reasonably consistent with what I've heard a lot of people involved in the EMS system say when talking about the near and short term. I'll be excited to figure out more short-term steps. I think that, I know the one big takeaway, I guess your first takeaway that seems really important is that EMS in Tompkins County is not a cohesive system of care, and it would be better if it were. And also, I do think, again, folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the providers, like the individual EMTs and paramedics and everyone are, in some sense, see more of the system because so many of them work or volunteer at multiple agencies. And so having, their perspectives gathered in the data is really valuable. I know we're short on time, but I guess in the spirit of hearing from other leaders in the field, I'd love to hear from Mark Whitmer and Roden Hart and Dan Lamb, if he's still there, if you've got any responses, as long as you've, been here sitting through all this.
Yeah, certainly. It sounds like we're going to try to do something at TCOG, but if you had any initial thoughts, I'm happy to hear them right now. We just have a few minutes. Yeah, Mark.
Thank you. This is Mark. I won't say too much. I really appreciate the presentation. I think the analysis and information's really, really helpful and informative. The one comment or question I have is about the impacts on the immediate EMS labor force. And my question would be that, for that could be true for the short term, but combined with, the ongoing efforts to expand career training in this area, I would just suggest that, building robust opportunities in this area, it could be a really positive thing in the future. So again, I think this is really helpful. I agree with Corsa on slide number 25 that it's a really important slide. And then the only thing I will also note is that I did look in my notes here, and the next TCOG meeting is on December 11th at 3 p.m. So.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Rorden, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, John, very briefly, thank you. Just a couple quick comments and then a question for Paul, actually. First of all, thank you, Paul, for the presentation. I find it helpful from the perspective of being able to see all of the data quantified in one place that we've been discussing for years, and being able to pull it all together so that it's not just me, Mark, and Dan saying it. It's nice to see it in black and white and red on a presentation. So thank you for all that. Quick comment to Mike Sigler, asked about how do the smaller agencies feel about that last slide. I can't speak for Dryden or Groton, but I can speak for Trumansburg when I say that we do not run an ambulance service because we really want to be in the ambulance business. We run an ambulance service because if we didn't operate, there would be no one, including Bangs or anyone to our north, capable of stepping in and picking up the calls that we currently cover. So in a version and that 25-year time frame, I think Paul was generous with that. I would probably have said 2035, not 2050. We're going to get to a place where the Drydens and the Trumansburgs either can't or won't be able to afford providing these services. And so how do the small agencies feel about it? I think at worst, we believe it's inevitable, and at best, we would welcome it, simply because of the tax burden to our taxpayers from providing the service that we already do. And then a quick question for Paul, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Paul. It's come up twice, both in the presentation and then in one of Lee's questions, that Bangs does not share their real-time capacity with our dispatchers, so we don't actually have. I've heard the number 4 to 6. Anecdotally, I think it's about half of that on any given Saturday. And we don't know what their availability is. So my question is, it's not specifically to that, but I'm wondering if in all of your experience and all of the studies you've done and all of your awareness of other counties, are you aware of any other situation anywhere in New York State where a public safety entity, whether it's ambulance or private security, a for-profit public safety entity has access to a county-owned CAD or Spillman system for no charge, and also without a contract where there are deliverables in exchange for access to that taxpayer-funded system?
Paul, do you feel ready to answer that, or?
Rorden, I can say off the top of my head, no. I have one colleague on the line, Jim Casson, I think is still with us, who is aware of a lot of systems as well. And I don't know, Jim, if you can think of one that has the access to the county CAD like Bangs does.
Well, let's look here in Monroe County, Paul, as an example with our two commercial providers. They have direct connect links CAD to CAD. All right. AMR does have a contract with the city of Rochester. Monroe Ambulance does not have a contract with the city or a direct contract with the county of Monroe. They do have some local agreements, is the first one that pops in my head.
But Jim, their access to the Monroe County CAD is receive only. They're not entering data. They're not tracking their business records through the county system.
Real time goes back, so unit response times go back and forth, and they can actually enter a job in the county CAD system for mutual aid requests if they have a direct call.
Okay.
Okay.
But they are maintaining their own records management system for their own business.
Yeah.
That is correct.
All right. I think we're pretty far down in the weeds on that one, but we are also out of time. But this is obviously a discussion that will continue. You know, I have really enjoyed my time on the legislature, and this is one of those issues that I am going to feel bad about, that it will carry on, and I'd love to be involved in seeing it to some resolution, and I won't. But I'm confident that there's so many good brains in the room that will pick it up and get us to a better unified, cohesive system. But yet to see, I guess. Anything further on this before we just close up our meeting? All right. Can I just ask, I'll run through the department heads. Is there anything that we really need to know? And I'll start with our sheriff. Welcome to the meeting.
Hey, Rich. Thank you. No, everything can wait till next month.
All right. And is Matt here?
He left.
Oh, he left. Okay. I assume that's a good sign. Department of Emergency Response. And I know you had a news report there about AMR in Syracuse doing a contract with their city. Yeah.
Nothing else.
Nothing else. Okay. Department of Probation and Community Justice. Welcome, Dan.
Welcome. Thank you. We're all set for this month.
Okay. And then assigned counsel program. Is Lance with us? I do not see him on screen. Okay. County Administrator, Corsa.
We're done.
All right. And committee member reports. Is there anything anybody needs to share with us right now? All right. Veronica.
Joe, thanks for leading a great CPR class the other day.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, obviously more to come on this. And if there's nothing further in front of us, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Shauna moves, Veronica seconds. All those in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. What's that?